And we have a big show for you tonight. The criminal probe intensifying. Donald Trump obsessed over what it all means and his problems with reality that affect democracy in America. Also, later tonight, by the end of the hour, we will hear from 9-time Grammy Award winner Sheryl Crow, including her take on politics and a lot more. Also, what is going on with Donald Trump Jr.? If he's so rich, why is he doing what you see on the screen? We'll get to that later. But we begin with a clear escalation in the federal sex crime probe involving Congressman Matt Gaetz. The news, we've touched on this story before, but I've never said what I'm about to say to you tonight. The news is the feds are now eyeing possible obstruction of justice. That is a new and separate felony from what we knew about what was under investigation. This stemming from a phone call that a witness had with the MAGA favorite and Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz' ex-girlfriend, who apparently, according to these reports, patched Gaetz into the call. This was initially a story broken by Politico. It has been confirmed by NBC News. We can see how the investigation is moving with this key witness spilling everything to the feds, including what by definition sounds like things that some people might not want to get out. Meanwhile, Gaetz' guilty and convicted associate, Joel Greenberg, cooperating, talking to the feds, under a legal obligation to share anything and everything, whether he wants to or not, whether he thinks it's relevant or not. Now, Gaetz' office is saying, quote, Congressman Gaetz pursues justice. He does not obstruct it. Let me be clear. That is a specific denial to the specific new charge. It tells you on the one hand that this is a big and significant thing that they want to address precisely. It also tells you that, as with all of these cases, we want to report everything for you. The feds don't just look at a felony or a sex crime or obstruction out of the blue. They have some sort of reason. But the subjects of these probes, the people caught up in them, have every right to make their legal defense and denial. And we have reported throughout what has been a very salacious case that Mr. Gaetz maintains his innocence across the board. What we know is the sex trafficking probe is ongoing. And we know he has not yet been charged with any crime. I want to bring in our experts for this. We have Melissa Murray, NYU law professor, and Jason Johnson, professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University. Welcome to you both. Melissa, you don't have to be a longtime news viewer to remember that Donald Trump was accused of multiple instances of obstruction of justice. The conservative count in the Mueller report is 5, and then there were some that were gray. But he was president, so it was dealt with in a very specific way. He had no more vocal defender of the idea that he didn't and perhaps couldn't commit obstruction than Matt Gaetz. What do you see legally and beyond here in the idea, the report, that the feds are looking at this among other potential charges?
Well, it suggests that the investigation has moved into a stage where they're not only dealing with the information that Greenberg is offering, but potentially information from those who are associated with Greenberg who are also telling them things. And again, obstruction of justice is a pretty wide range of activity that could be encapsulated in that. It's anything including threats or coercion, or even more minor things like just simply trying to influence the administration of justice. So lots of things could go in this. So if Matt Gaetz, for example, suggested that this particular individual should shade her testimony or get her story straight, for example, that would technically be obstruction of justice. And so we've always heard that it's not the crime, but the cover-up. In this case, it might be both the crime and the cover-up that actually is the issue here for investigators.
Very, very well put. I mean, I think you made it make sense there. And Jason, the wider probe here is very serious because it involves, again, not just lurid or serious accusations, but at this juncture, serious convictions because of what Mr. Greenberg has admitted to. Now, we don't know how many other people are involved in that. We know the feds, when they say there's a sex crimes conspiracy of this nature, they want to go down every alley and try to catch anyone who was involved. Right. We also know that Greenberg says really negative things about other people. What we don't know, and I'm not trying to be annoying or didactic to the viewers, I just want to be as precise as possible, we don't know that everything Greenberg says is true. In fact, there's reason to be very suspicious of him in general. So with that in mind, I want to play what was some of the accusations he made that are in this salacious letter. It's not his voice. It's read by a reporter who obtained it. Take a listen.
It was at this time that one of the girls, who had represented herself to be 19 years old and was due to move to Texas that upcoming August to attend a new college, was in fact 17 years old, roughly 5 months shy of her 18th birthday. She had a fake ID, her best friends were all in college, and there was absolutely no way a reasonable person could know this individual was not yet 18. On more than one occasion, this individual was involved in sexual activities with several of the other girls. The congressman from Florida's 1st congressional district and myself, I did see the acts occur firsthand, and Venmo transactions, Cash App, or other payments were made to these girls on behalf of the congressman.
So, Jason, the guy who's cooperating with the feds is on record in writing accusing this congressman of this misconduct. As Melissa reminded us, we're in the investigative stage where they're looking at all potential things. Walk us through what this means, not just on the law, but from your view for a Republican Party that certainly in this case is under scrutiny.
Well, what this speaks to, Ari, is not just how bad the accusations are, but the fact that we've seen Matt Gaetz be very sloppy throughout this entire process, right? The reason we're hearing this new story is because allegedly he's on the phone. And at this point, when you're under investigation, he should, the representatives should assume that his phone is tapped. They're trying to get him for old raps. Like, every single person he talks to, he should be careful. So what this suggests to me is not only were you potentially involved in bad behavior that other people have seen, you're now running around the country, running around your local community, talking to exes and trying to clean up the story. That is a bad sign for Gaetz. However, and this is another important number. We've talked about people being, underage, everything, but the most important number to Matt Gaetz right now is 1.8. He raised $1.8 million in the first quarter of this year, even though he's been dogged with these accusations. He's raised more money than any congressional representative in Florida. And he went from 2 months ago saying, I don't even know if I'm going to run again, to last week with Marjorie Taylor Greene saying he might run for president in 2024. So right now, this doesn't appear to be hurting him.
I always learn a lot from both of you, sometimes similar topics, sometimes different. I had not heard that, Jason, so I think you're teaching us something interesting. Florida is one of the largest delegations in the country because it's done by people, so you have a lot of representatives. You're telling us right now, with all this going on, he's actually raising more than everyone else.
Yes, $1.8 million for the first quarter. He outraised everybody else in the state, every single Democrat. I think the next closest person was a Republican who raised about $700,000. And if you look back even specifically in his own district, he commandeered a poll just about a couple of weeks ago in his own district. Only 20% of district residents in Florida District 1 actually believe the accusation against Gaetz. Now, 40% say they don't know, which is not a good sign when you've been their representative. But politically right now, he's safe. And if he can continue to raise this kind of money for himself and potentially the rest of the party, he might just get through this. I don't think he's going to be able to run for president in 2024, but he certainly could run for re-election in 2022, and he might get there.
Wild. Professor, any thoughts on all the above?
Again, he may be a sitting congressman. That doesn't mean he's immune from criminal liability if indeed he is charged and if there is a criminal trial. Like, obviously, there's a lot between those 2 points. But the fact that he's been able to raise $1.8 million really speaks more to the force of this deep state theory that he's really been a proponent of, and that's really characterized this wing of the Republican Party over the last couple of years, than it does about the force of these charges, which are incredibly, incredibly serious.
Right.
Yeah. And so, Professor, where do we go from here with you have Greenberg's sentencing? Everyone's going to be interested in whether they can glean anything from that, although, as always, we don't necessarily know when we would learn more. The feds can move at their own pace with this kind of probe. What are you looking to in the sentencing, or when we'll learn more?
Well, we'll definitely know what the sentence is on August 19th when he appears before the court to be sentenced. What the actual sentence is and what it's predicated on, that is how much he cooperated with the federal investigators, is an entirely different story that we're probably not going to know more about until later in this process. But the fact that he is ready to be sentenced and that the plea has been entered and it's concluded means that they've gotten, I think, most of what they need from Greenberg, and they're probably moving through the other individuals that Greenberg alerted them to during the course of this investigation. So at the very least, we know that this is moving at a relatively rapid clip.
So if that's right, and I don't know if you'll answer this or not, but Then is your theory of the case that the obstruction charge would be like the icing on something they've already prepared, or the backstop because they didn't get anything else more serious?
Hard to tell, but this doesn't seem to be like a Martha Stewart situation where they never actually had proof of insider trading, but instead they were focused on the fact of telling the story, the cover-up that led to the obstruction charge, and that's what ultimately she was convicted on. This could be both and or either or. We really don't know, but the fact that Greenberg is now pleading guilty and is preparing for sentencing suggests that the prosecutors have gotten what they need from him, and what that is, I think, is an open question, but I think it's probably more wide-ranging than just this obstruction charge.
Yeah, you mentioned Martha Stewart. Viewers have heard a lot about SDNY and how aggressive they are. That was the case where it turned out she did not actually commit a financial crime, but for whatever reason, she repeatedly lied about it. And SDNY said, even absent the underlying crime, the fact that you obstructed in a very stupid or perhaps arrogant way, they were still going to charge. Guilty of that. Also, Jason Johnson may or may not know, she's also guilty of making a mean chocolate chip cookie.
I've heard both her and Snoop have talked about how great her cookies are. Yeah, she bakes well.
There you go. On the higher order of things, it was one of the smaller cases, controversial even, but it does illustrate Melissa's point, which is it can go either way. We can't assume because they're talking obstruction, they have everything. But we will keep following this case. It's a big one. I want to thank Melissa and Jason for kicking us off.